There was a lot in those readings this morning. So you're probably saying, wow, we're lucky Monsignor's not preaching. We would have been watching the ball drop as we walked out of the church. One of my favorite Christmas movies is It's a Wonderful Life. And I'm sure everyone has heard of it, but how many have actually watched the movie from beginning to end? Usually you just grab a clip of it. I'm glad so many have actually watched it. This year, I had my kids sit with me to watch the entire movie from beginning to end. And while we were watching it, as things got more and more dire for George Bailey, my daughter back there looked at me and said, "Why are you making us watch this depressing movie?" I told her it's not depressing. It's great. It's complicated. And you have to watch the entire movie and get to the end. Problem is, kids today do not watch the entire movie. In fact, they don't watch the entire anything anymore. We don't have that attention span, I guess, like we used to. We want to be entertained all of the time. We want to be happy all of the time. We tend to look for what is superficial and not want to work through the difficulties in order to get to the end when we could really find something that's sustaining, everlasting, and worthwhile. And perhaps that's why family life tends to suffer more and more as we go on. In It's a Wonderful Life, the movie opens with a series of voiceovers from different people who are praying for George Bailey. And one of those people is Mr. Martini. He's the Italian Catholic who George Bailey helps to purchase his first home. And in praying for George, Mr. Martini prays in a very distinct way from all the other voices you hear. He prays invoking the Holy Family. He calls upon Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. Following that, we hear the voice. We hear the voice in the cosmos speaking with God the Father. And the voice isn't that of Mary or maybe the Archangel Michael, but it's Joseph. It's Joseph who then speaks with God in order to help to organize the rescue plan for George Bailey. In fact, it's Joseph who then instructs Clarence, he's the angel, on the life of George Bailey and sends him forth to help him. And hopefully Clarence may even get his own wings. And why does Joseph play such a vital role in the storyline? Because It's a Wonderful Life is about family. And who better than to have as the hero of the Holy Family, highlighting this story about George Bailey and his wonderful life. Our gospel reading today is also one of the few that focus in on Saint Joseph as the protagonist of the Christmas story. In this period of salvation history, the safety of the Holy Family and thus the preservation of hope for the salvation of all of humanity is in St. Joseph's hands, isn't it? Mary is immaculate, yes. The child Jesus is divine. But like many good action films, at the moment of crisis, the plot is left to the one character who doesn't have superhero-like abilities or superpowers. It's Joseph. It's Joseph today who, by listening to God and then acting on those words, saves Jesus and protects the Holy Family. Through our readings today, we're called to be holy families, and that's the point. And through our readings today, we're told that, like that movie, It's a Wonderful Life, we have to sit through it all. Yes, the happy times, but yes, the depressing times, the difficult ones, and the messy ones. Look at the Holy Family themselves, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. Yes, they're a holy family, but are they a perfect family? Being holy doesn't mean being perfect. The few stories that we know about the Holy Family really don't paint a picture of perfection. Let's think about it. The first story that we hear about the Holy Family, they were about to get divorced. St. Joseph is about to divorce Mary. And later on, one of the last stories we hear about them as a family, the mother and father lose the kid. They don't even know where he is for a couple of days. God chose to enter into time and space And he didn't choose to do so as a warrior king or on a chariot of fire. God comes to save the world first by sanctifying the very core of who we are as a people, family. He didn't come to build a nation or a political system. He came to be part of a family, the most basic and most important building block of creation. Something that as we move more and more into our culture of me, myself, and I think we move further and further away from, unfortunately. You know, the funny thing about this movie, It's a Wonderful Life, is that if you look at it, George really did have a wonderful life, full of meaningful relationships, yes, personal setbacks, but love and family and friends and community. And it's at his lowest moment. It is his lack of wealth that he dwells on, not all of those other things. The need for financial stability makes him desperate. It makes him desperate to the point that he stands on the edge of that bridge. He stops communicating with his wife about what his problems are, if you watch it. He snaps at his kids. He blames his uncle and his deceased father for getting him involved in this penny loan company to begin with, in which he feels stuck. George could have used all of the readings that we heard today, which remind us of our roles as spouses, as parents, and even as children who eventually become our parents' parents one day. No, it's not fun. Yes, it is a challenge. And that's why we need a reminder sometimes of just how wonderful life is. Because when we're in that moment, when we're getting dinner ready, when we're doing the laundry, when we're trying to put the kids to bed, when we're trying to pay the bills, it doesn't seem so wonderful, does it? In fact, even in a family, it can become very lonely sometimes. It can become dark, and it can become especially painful when we stop listening to one another, when communication breaks down. Just like Mary, who tells Joseph that she's with child, and instead of listening to the entire story and trusting her, he says he's going to divorce her. But we must listen to God's word that we heard like Joseph today in these readings, to act on them as we are told. We cannot let the things of the world overwhelm us, like finances, like George Bailey does. Look at the Holy Family. Jesus not only enters the world in a family, but he enters the world into a poor family. We all think that one of the things that can protect us in this world is money. And it can, right? Money can protect us from lots of different things. Usually when there's an issue, right away we say, okay, do we have enough to cover this? What do we have to do? What do we need to get or purchase or buy? I don't know if you've noticed this, but Jesus didn't enter into this world looking for those protections. In fact, he forgo that protection. Jesus came into the world not only in a broken family where the husband's about to divorce the wife, but he came into a poor one. And we hear in the Gospels even that when he is presented in the temple, where a sacrifice of an animal is supposed to be offered, like a lamb or an oxen, they don't have enough, so the only thing that they could offer were 2 small birds. In fact, we don't hear about Jesus owning anything. Everything we see Jesus use, everything we see that Jesus ever has, is borrowed from the moment of his birth. This poor boy borrowed a cave to be born in. It wasn't his. He borrows a manger, as Father Cletus pointed out on Christmas morning, the trough that the animals fed out of, as his first crib. From the very first moment of his public ministry, he borrowed a boat to preach out of. He borrowed the money to pay the temple tax. Jesus borrows the room for the Last Supper. He even borrows someone else's cross, because it was meant for someone else to hang upon. And when he dies, he's laid in a borrowed tomb. By today's standards, Jesus had nothing. All of those things that we cling to when we're afraid and when we're nervous and when we think we need protection. The things that can sometimes shield us from the difficulties of life, Jesus did not choose those things. He entered into a family. He entered into a family where he even borrowed a dad, Joseph. In some ways, his adopted father, his borrowed father, to highlight the fact that God comes even into the most complex and interesting and out of the normal families. That's where he entered for protection. He doesn't insulate himself in the way you or I would with the things that we buy through our monetary wealth or the things that we accumulate. George Bailey was going to end his life because he didn't have enough money. He thought that his worth was tied to his wealth and not the other riches he had accumulated. God teaches us in the Holy Family that the only thing that is needed to fulfill his mission is family, is relationships, whether by blood or by choice, which are the true measures of wealth in our lives. If God understands what it is to be part of a family, God enters into this world and says, here's what I'm going to ask you to do. And he lays it out for us in those first two readings. Things like care for your parents, even when they have nothing to offer you. I know for myself as a kid, whenever I would hear the fourth commandment, honor thy mother and father, the first thing you think of is, okay, I shouldn't talk back, right? Right, Marcello, you don't talk back? He hid, you noticed that, right? Then we realize, as we get deeper into this thing called life, as we grow and as they age, for the obligations that we have to our parents, it's not just about honoring them and not talking back. The obligation is that we owe to our parents, as it says in Sirach, my son, do not disdain your father in his old age, but care for your mother when she has nothing left. There is something we are called to. We are not just called to be polite to one another. We are actually commanded to care for one another, regardless of our shortcomings, to respect the place in life which we all hold and which our relationships hold us in. Even in the midst of broken families, even when parents are not perfect, we are commanded by the Lord to respect their place in life. We don't have to respect their character. They may not have good character. They may not have character worth being proud of. But if they're our mom and our dad, we are called to respect their place. Or even as it says in Colossians, to forgive one another if there's a grievance, if there's anything to forgive. And that's the key to any good family, any good relationship, any good marriage. Forgiveness. And that's as much for the other person's sake as it is for your own. God says we need to forgive, and that's the one reason why I invite all of you to go back and reread these readings at some point this week. Reread them and say to yourself, how in the world am I supposed to do this? You may say to yourself, these commandments might have been good 2,000 years ago. They might have been good for Jesus' time or during the time when Sirach is being written. But life today is much more complicated. It's much more nuanced. It's much more complex. After all, what about my feelings? After all, what about who's right and who's wrong? It doesn't talk about those things. And this is the last thing. I know it's confusing, because every day is confusing. But if we look at what's changed, a lot has changed in 2,000 years. But what has not changed is the human heart. We still all come from families. We're still made for families. We're made for relationships. We're made for love. And so those commandments still stand firm. The message of the gospel and the message of It's a Wonderful Life rings true today, just as they both did 2,000 and 100 years ago, respectively. Why? Because family is at the very foundation of who we are. We're made in the image and likeness of God, right? That's what it says in Genesis. we're made in the image and likeness of God. What's that image? It's the image of a God who is Father, Son, and Spirit. A family of relationships. We are made in the image of those persons who are in relationship with others. This is our image. And no man is a failure who has friends. At the end of the movie, yes, George Bailey realizes that his worth and his wealth is found in the relationships that he's made in his life, in his wife, in his children, in his community, and his brother even rushes in and says that he's the wealthiest man in Bedford Falls. But it wouldn't have been such a happy ending had those people not forgiven George. If his wife, who he yelled at, his children, who he snapped at, hadn't forgiven him. Or if those people who were giving George money didn't mind the fact that George couldn't pay them back because he didn't have it in return. Starting January 1st, you're going to hear that you need to make a New Year's resolution. You have to lose weight. Vito's laughing at that one. You have to make more money. You have to get this car or fix your house with these windows, whatever the commercial might be, right? Whatever they're selling you. But this year, make your resolution to build family. Build family among your friends. Build family among your enemies. Build it with your neighbor, with your children, with your parents, with your siblings, with your spouse. And build it by doing those things that it said at the beginning of that second reading. By forgiving, by communicating, by showing patience, and by realizing that you don't have to be a perfect family in order to be a holy family. And if you do, you will truly discover that it's a wonderful life.
Shall we rise and profess our faith to